But I'm gonna tell you something. If you pay the price, you can get what you want. I can get it for you.
Really?
Now, if you want something really young, that 200 will cost you. It just costs a little more than that.
Sure.
But how young you talking? Talk to me.
Well, how young do you have?
Well, I don't have nothing younger than 14.
Okay, no, 14 is good.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, you're gonna have to add something to that.
Sure.
What you willing to add to that too? Just talk to me.
Well, like I said, this is my first time out.
You know. Now you.
So the girls over there cost 2, is that?
That's the women.
The women.
Now, if I told you 2, and you know you want something young, and I tell you just to add something to it, just tell me, you just pick a figure to that.
Well, I guess, what, 3?
3. If you do 3, you got it.
He definitely just beat us, like, it'll probably stump you out, like when you're on the ground, physically stump you. Yeah. He'll probably hit you with a belt, physically slap you, punch you.
He would beat me with broomsticks, handles. He would burn me with candles. He would take metal hangers and beat me with them and poke me with them, belts, anything that he can get his hands on, he would beat me with. The one time he had beat me so bad that he had ruptured my spleen and it put me in the intensive care unit. So it's like, once you knew that he could almost kill you, you'd rather do what he says than to get beat again.
If you come to them, that'll be like 150.
Okay.
If they come to you out call, that'll be like 200.
Okay.
An hour.
And I got a hotel room, so that's an out call.
Yeah, that's all.
Okay, so 200 each.
Yeah, an hour.
Okay, so I'll give you 400. Or do I give them 200 or I give it to you?
Me, right
Okay,
now.
so I'll give you 400, and then we can tip the girls whatever
you
on
tip
top of
them.
that.
Yeah, okay, that's better.
Is that all right with you?
Hold on, I run all this.
Okay.
These my girls.
Oh, okay.
They don't do nothing but look pretty and
We're all under 18. We're all the same age. There would be a few girls that I knew that were like in their 20s or whatever, but they had been doing it since they were our age anyways. I did wait till 12, and these girls were doing it since they were like 8 or 9, and now they're like 23.
I want to show them and tell them, like, what it feel like to be that hoe, to be degraded all the time, to be hit on, to be manipulated, to be sold all day, every day. Who was there to stop it? Nobody was there to stop it.
Welcome to In the Cool of the Day, and I'm your host, Dr. Sharon Anderson, and this is our segment from Behind the Podium, Conversations about Law and Faith. Our topic today is human trafficking, a very, very important topic for our nation. Our guest today is Dr. Vanetta Rather. Dr. Rather is an ordained minister, she's a Baptist preacher, and she's also a prolific speaker and writer. And most importantly, she is the founder and executive director of My Sister, My Seed, a nonprofit organization which directly addresses the issue of human trafficking. Dr. Rather, Good afternoon.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Now, Dr. Rather, I have read that every year in the United States, 293,000 youth are at risk of becoming domestic minor sex trafficking, or victims of domestic minor sex trafficking. What is, for the audience's benefit, domestic minor sex trafficking?
Domestic minor sex trafficking is the selling of sexual activities from a minor person under the age of 18, and it can be in the form of prostitution. It can also be in the form of stripping. It can be in any form where a sexual activity of a minor is being exploited for profit.
Wow, and that 293,000 number, is that men and women or just women?
It's primarily women, but young men in this country are sold and trafficked just as well as young women. If you can imagine that some young men who are maybe thrown out of their homes or are runaways from home if they're trying to escape a chaotic situation, those young people oftentimes find themselves on the street, and initially they are trafficked to as a means of being exploited by a trafficker, a pimp, or sometimes even a family member.
And when we say traffic, I'm assuming that means sold, almost like sold into slavery, right?
Absolutely. Domestic minor sex trafficking is modern day slavery. Young people who are trafficked oftentimes do not have a say in where they go, where they live, what they wear, how often they work, and how much they are paid to work. They aren't paid to work, or so they have a quota almost even, so they have no say in their own personal freedom. So it is modern day slavery of young people.
And so very similar to what happened with the girls who were kidnapped in Nigeria, and then the young men or the kidnappers were selling them as wives and requiring them to perform sexual acts. Is very similar to that, right?
It is very much similar. Domestic minor sex trafficking, human trafficking, is a $32 billion industry in the world. It's only second to the selling of drugs. It is the second largest criminal industry in the world, including in the United States. Wow. So it is a major industry, and with those kinds of numbers, you can imagine that young people are targeted to be exploited, because in this country, a lot of people think that sex trafficking of young people is something that happens in foreign countries, but it is something that very much happens in America. And so young people are targeted, and the reality is they are targeted at young ages, because in America, as well as across the world, there is a market for grown men who want to sleep with children, and there's a major market for that. And so our young people are targeted for trafficking and end up as slaves in this very lucrative, profitable criminal industry.
Right, like the clip that we watched at the beginning of the show, we heard the gentleman talking to a customer and saying, you know, how young do you want it? And do you see the young lady over here? You know, what do you think about that? Is that young enough? So there, as you said, the industry really is targeting youth.
Right, the primary age of a person that is trafficked is 12 years old. So traffickers or pimps are going after young women and young men who are teenagers, and they are being sold on the streets and on the internet as if they're little less than property. So it is a major issue in this country, not just in foreign countries, but in every community, in every state in America. Young women and young men are in danger of being trafficked in this country.
And just in reading some of your literature and looking on your website, you've said that the DMV, DC, Maryland, and Virginia they are, and it is a major hub for trafficking. Why is that?
Absolutely. Maryland, DC, and Virginia is a major hub because, number one, it is a high tourism area. Our nation's capital is here, so we get a lot of visitors from all over the world, and wherever there's a high tourism, there is a lot of risk of trafficking. But that's not the only reason. The DMV area has a lot of major professional sports teams, with those teams in Baltimore, those teams in Maryland, hockey teams, basketball teams, football teams, and wherever there is a high concentration of sports, professional sports, we know that a lot of men gather there, and so there is a high concentration and high ingredient, that is a high recipe for trafficking. Not only the sports teams and the tourism, but also what makes Maryland, the DMV area, a high hub for trafficking is the reality that there's a lot of now casinos in this area.
Wow.
And wherever there's a lot of gambling, there is a lot of trafficking that happens. And those are just a few of the reasons why Maryland, not just Maryland, I live in Maryland, so I keep saying Maryland, but the DMV is a hub because also we have 2 international airports in the DMV area. So all of these are just great recipes for trafficking. Also, we're on the 95 corridor, and so young women are easily trafficked up and down the East Coast, and it makes it very easy to move these girls to whatever area that they need to. If you remember, during the Super Bowl, the Super Bowl was in New York, there was a major trafficking bust because girls who were coming from as far away as Miami were found in this trafficking bust because these girls are trafficked up and down the East Coast around sports activities, large sports activities. So that's just one example of how often it happens and why it's happening so readily here in the DMV area.
And I guess that's why they call it trafficking, because the women or the person is transported up and down throughout states. It's interstate.
Absolutely. I do a lot of street outreach here in the Washington, D.C. area, and we've found on the street when we're out at 3 o'clock in the morning, we see traffickers as far away as from Chicago and from California because girls are trafficked across the country. They're not just local. They're not just kept in one place. They are trafficked across the country. So you will see that. Traffickers, pimps, and girls that are in our area but who are not from our area because it is a moving industry.
Okay. And is there a specific profile that traffickers and pimps look for when they're selecting people? What does the average victim look like?
Well, I would say that anyone can become a victim of sex trafficking. I don't care what socioeconomic background you are from. Every young girl is in danger, and that's why we must do education to get that information out. But pimps will look for girls with low self-esteem, girls. When we know in this country that 1 in 3 girls have been molested by the time they're 18, and 1 in 6 young men have been molested by the time they're 18, with all of the shame and the guilt that goes along with being molested, that is a prime target that a pimp will look for, someone who doesn't feel very good about themselves. So girls with low self-esteem, they look on the internet, on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram for young women who are posting inappropriate pictures because they're looking at that as an opportunity that must be maybe possibly a young woman who doesn't feel very good about herself, doesn't have a very good high self-esteem. So they're targeting young women that way, but they will target anyone. I've heard stories about a young woman from a very affluent community, and she was targeted at her bus stop. A young, older man watched her at the bus stop and then befriended her and pretended to be in love with her, and then he took her home one day, told her not to catch the bus from school, but took her home one day, and he had his way with her and recorded it and then threatened her, and she was trafficked right out of her home in a suburban community. So it affects people of every community. I don't want people to think if you come from a low-income community, which they are highly susceptible to this kind of criminal activity. You know, they are targets. If you come from a low background, a low income community, there you are a prime target. But I don't want people from the suburbs to think that your children are safe, because everyone can become a victim. It's all about the access. that traffickers and pimps have to your children.
Well, we're going to take a short station break, but this is a very, very important topic. We'd ask that you not touch your dial. Dr. Rather has a lot of great information to share with you about it, and we hope that this is blessing you and educating you about the issue of human trafficking. Please stay tuned. Hello, I have a very important announcement from In the Cool of the Day. Join Pastor Zena Pierre for the very first annual Breaking Room Conference, Breaking Barriers, Birthing Purpose. The conference begins on August 28th through the 30th at the Gaylord National Harbor, Oxon Hill, Maryland. Guest preachers include Reverend Jackie McCullough and many, many more. For more information, text Breaking Room to 55469. And for details and updates, don't forget to watch In the Cool of the Day and the segment From Behind the Podium, Conversations about Law and Faith. God bless you. Welcome back to In the Cool of the Day and your segment From Behind the Podium, Conversations about Law and Faith. We've been talking with Dr. Vanetta Rather, who is an expert on the issue of human trafficking. And it's an issue that's very, very important for us as citizens of the United States, but certainly in this DMV area to really be educated about and begin to take action regarding. I've learned that minors are sold at an average of 10 to 15 times a day, 6 days a week, which equates to between 9,360 and 14,040 sex acts a year. And none of the victims in human trafficking versus in prostitution receive any of the money. Dr. Rather, just how does this happen? How do traffickers gain control over a victim? I'm sure that people are wondering, well, what's the difference between prostitution and trafficking? And, isn't it the victim's fault? Have they done something to entice someone? Can you talk a little bit about that? How do they gain control over these people?
Sure. Well, I think we have to do a job in this country of understanding or demystifying or reinterpreting prostitution or redefining it, because a lot of times we think when we see young women on the street that they want to be there, but a lot of them don't have a choice but to be there. They are threatened, they are coerced, they are beaten. A lot of the times is just horrific conditions as to why these young women are out there. So when we see young women on the street, we can't just assume that it's their choice that they're doing it, because it is, again, slavery, and they're forced into this. And a lot of sometimes they come into trafficking, they meet a trafficker, and there's a wooing process where a pimp will pretend to be in love with a young girl. And again, we're talking teenagers. Right. So when you're at that age, you're impressionable, you're looking for love, you're in that developmental stage where you're an adolescent. And so those are, the attention is something you look forward to or you look for. And so a pimp, a grown man, knows this. So he goes through a wooing process of making you feel loved and making you feel worthy. And if you've never felt those things before because you've been molested or because you come from a chaotic home, then those things are very appealing to you. And so after this wooing process is over, then the pimp or the trafficker switches the game, and then he will make these appeals to you that, well, if you love me, I need you to do these things for me. And sometimes the girl feels, that, it's her obligation to fulfill her part of the relationship to do this. But that's not the only way a pimp keeps a woman mentally in slavery, because we're not talking chains here where their wrists and ankles are chained and they're bound and they're forced there through physical chains, but it's a mental chain. And sometimes a pimp will beat one girl in front of the rest of the girls, and that is a way that they are trapped and fear leaving. A lot of times I've heard stories where a pimp will take an animal, say for example a rat, and he will burn singe the hair on the rat as an example of what he will do to them if they try to leave. So I don't want people to think that girls have a choice in this matter. There is a mental chain on the minds of most of these young girls, and they don't feel that they have an option. And a lot of times some of them don't, because they don't have homes to go to. They don't have places to go, and there are not a lot of resources, unfortunately, in our community. We don't have transitional houses for young women to go to, so a lot of times they just feel trapped, and that's why they don't leave. So we just have to rethink how we think about prostitution, because a lot of times these girls, we see them out there and think they have options when they don't have options.
And then I guess if it's trafficking, then if they're out of state, then they're separated from their family, they're separated from their friends, and if they're not getting any of the money, they don't have the resources to get back anyway.
Exactly.
So in addition to all of the mental slavery and the coercion through either physical coercion or, as you said, mental and emotional emotional coercion, then just lack of resources and lack of a support system could cause someone to feel bound.
Right, because when after several times of someone telling you who's going to want you and look at how your family treated you, that kind of stuff weighs on your mind, and you begin to think, well, that's true, where am I going to go, you know, if I leave here? You know, not only may I be beaten, but I don't have any place to go, so I'm trapped and I'm, you know, stuck here.
Yes.
And so I need the community and us as a country to view these women through that lens and not so much saying, well, they can leave if they wanted to. A lot of times they cannot leave if they wanted to.
That's right.
They want to leave, I believe. The ones I work with want a different outcome for their lives, but don't have the resources to do it.
And we saw on the clip there was a young lady who was able to get out and was able to make a life for herself. And you contribute a lot to that for women. You have this nonprofit organization that I just think is phenomenal, and applaud you for what you're doing. My Sister, My Seed. Please tell us about that organization.
Sure. I started out as a youth pastor. For 10 years I've been a youth pastor, and after preaching to young people, but still seeing that they have so many issues that a Sunday morning sermon can't address, I decided that I needed to start a nonprofit to tackle some of these issues. And as I began to learn about sex trafficking, it became a primary focus of mine to help the young women and the young men who are trapped in sex trafficking. And so I started My Sister, My Seed for that purpose, that we will help young women and young men. And what we try to do is prevention and awareness training for churches and schools, which is very difficult, you know, sad to say, but it is difficult to get into churches and schools and share this information, because a lot of pastors, unfortunately, think this is sensitive information and may not think that young people are ready to hear this. But when there's a target on a young girl's back and she's 12 years old, we can't wait to give her this information. She needs to be armed, and her parents need to be armed with this information now. But not only do we do prevention and awareness training, we do restorative training, trying to rebuild the lives of young women. And so right now I'm doing a dance therapy class for survivors of sex trafficking. It is just one way of trying to help young women see their worth and their value, and we do that through dance. And we do programs like Survivors Day Out, and it's a day where we take young women to get nails done and hair done and take them to lunch and have a day of empowerment as a sense to just try to bring their self-worth. And after you've been beaten down for so long and told you're nothing and you're just a piece of property, you need to be rebuilt and showed and be shown your value, so you can still believe that, you know, you are somebody and that you are special and that God loves you, and there are people out in the community who love and care about you as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that that's fantastic. So tell us, one thing that you said about what you do is prevention and awareness. How do you get a young lady, or how do you get the information to a young lady to come into My Sister, My Seed and actually begin the process of rebuilding?
You have to find these young women, and they're everywhere. There are several organizations that I partner with in Washington, D.C., who have a population of young women who have been victims of sex trafficking, who are survived sex trafficking, and I just make partnerships. I go into communities and I have to look for these girls, because again, this is a hidden something the community that's not being shared readily and as loud as it should be shared. So a lot of times I have to partner with organizations to find these girls, but I do, and I go out to do street outreach and I look for girls. You have to be very intentional about finding the young women who need your services, because, you know, they're not standing out there saying, hey,
sure, help me. Tell me about that experience, you know, going out and experiencing what these young women experience, given that outreach is part of what you do, is actually going and, you know, trying to pull someone out. I mean, that's what we talk about the pulpit. When we preach, we pull people out the pit. So you actually leave the pulpit, go out on the street and pull these young ladies and try. So how do you engage them, and what has been
a lot
your
of times you can't engage. You're out there trying to give information and let them know that there is there are services out here for them, but it's so difficult to get to these girls because you're putting them in danger if because they're being watched, because they're again seen as property, so they're being watched. So you're very limited what you can do in street outreach, but you try, and it's very heartbreaking work, because when I went through the training to do street outreach, I would ask the question, well, what if you see somebody and they said, well, 9 times out of 10 you're going to see somebody you may see your pastor, you may see your girlfriend's husband buying these girls. You may see a congressman, because it is so ingrained in our culture. And this market is driven. It's a $32 billion a year industry because we have too many grown men in our communities that want to sleep with children. So it is a very heartbreaking experience to be out there on the street knowing these girls are trapped. And some of them don't even realize that they're trapped. I've heard in a counseling session, I've heard a young woman who said that, it was her choice, that she felt like she was choice, and she could leave if she wanted to. And the counselor asked her, well, if you leave, what will happen to you? And she said, well, I will be beaten, I will, but she said, but a beating is nothing I can't come back from. So you're having to unchain the mentality of and help these girls see life in a different way and see that they were victimized, and to see that they are survivors, and help them understand that this wasn't your choice. This is something that happened to you, but this is definitely something you can survive and overcome.
And My Sister, My Seed really does that.
Absolutely.
And we're so thankful for you. The body of Christ thanks you for working in this area and bringing it to the forefront and bringing it to our attention and putting your life basically on the line to help these women. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my
pleasure. Thank God for you. Thank God for you. We're running out of time, but I did want to talk very briefly, very briefly, about your book, All the Single Ladies. Your women's ministry is your passion. So just very briefly, why did you write this book, and who is it targeted to?
I wrote the book because I counsel a lot of young single women in the church, and I get questions all the time about how to live. And I wrote the book because I didn't want modern women of faith to think that they had to be chained to tradition. I wanted them to have a freedom, because God planted us in a modern culture, and we can embrace this modern culture and still be committed to our ageless faith. And so I wrote this book to help modern women see that, you don't have to be enslaved to tradition. As long as you're faithful to God, you can enjoy and embrace being a woman who is alive in the 21st century. So I wrote it for young adult women. I'm finding young adult single women, maybe age 21, 20 through 40, whatever, but I'm finding that a lot of married women, just modern women of faith are enjoying the book as well.
Great.
So I recommend it to any modern woman of faith to understand that, as long as you're faithful to God, tradition, you don't have to be so much committed to tradition as you do committed to God. And God expects us to be free. Exactly. He doesn't want us in bondage. He wants us free to enjoy life.
Well, we thank God for you, Dr. Rather, and we thank God for engaging us in the conversation about the topic of human trafficking. It's definitely a topic that we as Americans need to embrace and address. If you know anyone who needs help in the area of human trafficking, is a victim of human trafficking, please call the Human Trafficking Referral Hotline, and the number is 1-888 337-8888. That's 1-888-337-8888. Thank you for tuning in to From Behind the Podium, conversations about law and faith and in the cool of the day. Stay blessed.